Hello and welcome to Wine Blast, or should I say, welcome to the famous Greek island of Santorini, because we are going on an adventure. One that involves an incredibly violent volcano on the one hand and loads of amazing wine on the other.
Yeah, what's not to like? Welcome, yes. And you don't want to miss this very special two-parter where we've teamed up with Wines of PDO Santorini to immerse ourselves in what I would bullishly term the ultimate wine destination.
That is quite bullish.
Da, da, da. I feel like we need some theme music to kick in there.
Well,
other theme music, not normal theme music. That would be weird. Carry on.
There is no shortage of competition for that title.
Yeah, no, exactly. You're quite right. So, there are loads of amazing wine destinations out there. I'm well aware of that. But, on the other hand, to call Santorini unique doesn't quite capture the magic of the place, does it? It's truly the stuff of legends. Anyway, it's something we can explore together, and then perhaps everyone can make their own minds up. How about that?
Fair enough. So, the plan is to dive into the intriguing world of Santorini over 2 episodes. In this first one, we'll set the scene, talking about the look and feel of the place, the history, what makes it special, not overlooking the threats and challenges too. And then in the second part, we'll take a closer look at the grapes and wine and discuss what the future holds.
Yeah, so this was our second visit to Santorini, and we made sure to interview as many wine producers as we could. We positively scoured the island, trying as much food and wine as we could humanly manage along the way. I'm sure some sort of records were set during this. Anyway, this 2-part mini-series is the fruit of our labours, our homework, if you will. And here are just a few of the things we heard along the way.
You cannot easily sit in a taverna, enjoy a fresh fish, and have a glass of wine from vines that are 500 years old.
It's like a Jurassic Park of the vineyards, because it's one of the most ancient vineyards of the world.
Santorini is sort of the mecca of wine in Greece.
You're having basically the personality of an active volcano in your glass.
Sometimes you need the help of God, and there are times in Santorini that we feel like we are a little bit forgotten by God.
It was like discovering Atlantis.
Santorini is jewel in the crown. You up there, you're on Champions League, you're not playing on the local league,
Okay, so from Jurassic Park to Atlantis via the Champions League. This is definitely right up your street, isn't it?
Talking of which, I've got a couple more clips here I just want to play for a bit of fun. You know how in our last episode, I can see your face, we talked about how these podcasts are a place where we can kind of work out our differences, yeah? Well, I just wanted to illustrate those differences, perhaps our different approaches, you might be able to say.
What have you got?
In this case, our different approaches to the task of setting the scene for Santorini, as you've just said. So we did take a moment on the island before one of our early morning interviews to set the scene. And this is how you did it.
Well, I'm sitting here on a terrace in Santorini. The sun is shining. It's kind of dappled through the terrace roof ahead above us. And I've got some bougainvillea to my right, which is looking beautiful against the white walls. And I'm looking out over a vineyard of beautiful Santorini-style vines. I say beautiful. They're not really beautiful. They're just kind of rambling. And in the distance, I can see some typical white buildings, some Santorini-style Greek white buildings. I can see the sea, and I can hear the birds singing, which is really rather lovely. It's all very calm, very beautiful, and we're ready to record.
And then this is how I did it. Harsh is the wrong word, but you can sense the harshness of life here. With the sun beating down overhead, the sea there, the wind whipping around you, the soil is black. Yeah. You look, the most spectacular views here are over a caldera. Essentially, the island collapsed in on itself due to a massive, monumental volcanic explosion a couple of thousand years ago, which is not that long. It's still active. So, for me here, you get a sense of the precariousness of human life, of existence. It reminds you we are on a rock hurtling through space. and this is just some weird adventure we're playing out here. And wine is a really weird, fun part of that weird adventure. And I think that's kind of what it sums up to me. It's almost like, being shot to the moon and allowing that to give you a sense of perspective on your life.
You never want to undersell the drama, are you? So, Santorini for you is like being shot to the moon with a glass of fine wine in your hand. Interesting notion.
Something like that.
But we definitely do have different approaches. This is true. Yeah. So to come back down to earth, if we may, we need to start this story at the beginning. Though this being Greece, knowing where the beginning is can be tricky.
Yeah, quite. I remember one wine grower on the island said to me, "We are Greeks. Time for us has another dimension." I think that was the accent. Anyway.
Was he Greek? Definitely.
He was in my mind. You get the gist, Anyway, so maybe the best place to start is the where, not the when. So in this sense, Santorini is a small island in the South Aegean Sea. So we're talking Eastern Mediterranean, between mainland Greece and Turkey, north of Crete, so north of North Africa, Egypt, Libya too. There's a whole profusion of islands here, known as the Cyclades or Cyclades, of which Santorini is the southernmost island.
Now we're calling it Santorini, but its historic and official name is Thera. It apparently got the nickname Santorini from the Cathedral of Santa Irini on the island. Actually, it's had quite a few names over the years, and my favourite of those is Calliste, which means the most lovely or beautiful one. Now, incidentally, names are important here, and we'll come back to why when we discuss Vinsanto in our next episode.
Yeah, good point. Now, one thing you notice about Santorini from a map is that, and you may need to bear with me a bit here, it looks a bit like, and this is a very Peter association coming out.
It is indeed. I know what you're going to say.
It looks like a donut. A ring donut, the ones with the hollow bit in the middle, with the left-hand side chomped off. Okay, that's a very Simpsons reference, but I hope that kind of it's like sort of three sides of a circle, if that makes sense. But if it doesn't make sense,
it would make sense if a circle had sides.
Well, there you go. But what does make sense is when you start to understand that the island is effectively the top cone of a volcano, with the western side collapsed, so the Aegean Sea flows through the caldera or the hollow at the top of the volcano.
And that thought is both illuminating and slightly scary. But it's illuminating because the volcanic nature of Santorini is crucial to understanding both its history and its wine. To stand on this island is to perch on the top, the tiny exposed top of a volcano that 3,500 years ago exploded in one of the biggest eruptions in human history. Part of the island collapsed beneath the waves, but another whole part was added because so much rock and ash was spewed out and fell back down to earth. So to give you an idea of the scale, in some parts of the island, the volcanic debris from that eruption lies 60 metres thick over what was ground level before.
So 60 metres, 60 metres.
Is that about 30 of you?
It's mind-boggling. 30 of me is even more mind-boggling, but let's not go there. That's a lot of wine. But, you can see this phenomenon with your own eyes when you visit the archaeological site of Akrotiri on the southern tip of the island, as we did. So here they've dug up the vineyards that are merrily growing in the black volcanic soil. So that's a boo for wine, but yay for archaeology. Don't know where we stand on that, but anyway, because far beneath the current ground level, they found an ancient city that was destroyed in that very same eruption of 1625 BC, 3,500 years ago. And that city is just breathtaking, isn't it?
Oh, it is. I mean, now this site is often referred to as the prehistoric Pompeii. It's about 1,700 years older than Pompeii. The site dates back to the Bronze Age or Minoan times, but the settlement is thought to have started as far back as 6,500 years ago in the Neolithic period. Now, just for reference, that's quite a bit older than Stonehenge.
That's crazy.
Unbelievable. I mean, Greece does not do history by halves, does it? But at Akrotiri, what they've found is spectacular. Evidence of a highly advanced democratic and enlightened society who built multi-storey anti-earthquake buildings with beautiful furniture, sophisticated sewage and toilet systems, and most importantly, where women seem to hold pride of place.
Enlightened indeed. I mean, I can't add much to that.
What can
given
you
you're
say?
sitting
You
within
really
arm's
can't
reach of me.
say much, can you?
There's definitely clear evidence that these were very successful traders, navigators, and seafarers, and that Akrotiri metropolis was a sort of buzzing cosmopolitan hub back in the day. And further proof that they were enlightened, of course, other than placing women at the top of the tree, was the evidence of wine and winemaking that's been found, from the stone grape press that's been found to a prehistoric bank. I love this. The prehistoric bank where you made your deposits in jars of wine. I mean, you could deposit beans and other sort of valuable things, but wine, you could make your deposit in wine. So I love this thought so much. I think I might try it out next time I head into my local bank branch. What do you reckon?
Yeah.
Take a massive vase of wine with me and say, I'd like to make a deposit, please.
I'd like to see that. Now that sounds weird. Sorry.
Yes, it
My
does.
mind has gone in the wrong direction with that one. I'm sorry. Let's move on quickly. Because sadly, we don't have time for an archaeology lesson there.
Or an arrest.
What a shame. But to suffice it to say that back in prehistoric times, Santorini was clearly a successful, advanced, wealthy trading hub in which wine was a key commodity. And we assume their wine may well have been similar to the wines you can still taste on the island today. Yeah. It's in the shape of the sweet vinsantos, based largely on the Assyrtiko grape. But we're going to come back to that, aren't we?
Yeah. And let me just end on the tantalising notion that the Akrotiri settlement and Santorini may have been an inspiration for Plato's Atlantis. So that might put what we're talking about into some kind of context.
You love that idea, don't you?
Or not, as the case may be. Whatever. Anyway, moving on. I do love that idea.
Yeah, I know. I
do love that idea.
History.
What a thought. Anyway, so life on Santorini has come and gone over the intervening years. The only consistent theme being it's a harsh existence on what is, a windy, arid, tectonically active outcrop in the middle of a vast sea with pretty much zero fertility of soil. And the result is that, what is found on Santorini is pretty rugged, wild, intense, from the tomatoes to the wines, even the people.
And when you talk about eking out a living, Santorini definitely takes the biscuit. Our guide told us, life's a struggle here, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
There you go, that's cheery.
And one of the very few things, as you say, that will grow in such inhospitable terrain is the vine. So this is what people used for domestic purposes and to trade. But as with most things on Santorini, these aren't your usual vines or vineyards. They are incredibly hardy local varieties grown in a unique and ingenious system of basket training to protect the grapes from the sun and the wind and to retain every last drop of desperately needed moisture, because these are they're dry farmed vines in a place that gets an average annual rainfall of 300 millimeters. That's annually. And one might make a joked, it's like an average week in London.
Or average day. Yeah. And that's an average annual. I think it can be a lot less than that some years as well. Which
that's 30 centimetres. That's a ruler.
It's nothing. And most of that
the
falls
whole year.
Most of that falls at the wrong time of year. So they can't, the vines, since it's winter when the vines aren't sort of working. So they can't use it. So anyway, perhaps surprisingly, the main style here is white wine, not red. The majestic, fearsome Assyrtiko grape is the mainstay here, which makes a sort of scintillating, mineral-infused, dry white wine of epic proportions. Santorini Assyrtiko is without doubt one of my favourite wines on the planet, and also, in my mind, following that thread, the ultimate food wine.
More big claims.
Yep, they're big words.
You are on fire, Mr. Richards.
I'm in declamatory mode. Sorry.
But as I've already said, it's not just about the dry white, is it? There's also the incredibly sweet, rich vinsantos, plus a bit of red. But whatever the wine style, the wines themselves always speak of this place. In in their rugged intensity, their mineral dimension, their salty, tangy concentration, and they're rightly celebrated, but they're also under threat.
Yeah, well said. So I guess the spectre of climate change rears its ugly head here. Heat waves, and more recently, totally unseasonal rain, deluges, even hail have seriously impacted vintages. But just as pressing is the story told in the halving of Santorini's vineyards since the 1980s. Half of them have disappeared. The official figures show the island's vineyard declined by more than 30% between 2005 and 2022, down to now just around 860 hectares.
So, given all we've said, why on earth did this happen? Well, the blame is placed squarely on the booming tourism industry. It's estimated that between 2 and 2.5 million people visit Santorini every year. Why wouldn't you? It's stunning, it's delicious, it's hot stuff. I mean, Konstantinos Lazarakis, MW, in his excellent book, The Wines of Greece, writes, "There are no words to describe Santorini's magnificence. One has to see it, and most of all, feel it for oneself. Its wines are also among the best in Europe, and it is almost a sad fact that these two qualities coexist on the same plot of land." Basically saying, because of its popularity as a tourist destination, Santorini's wine is endangered.
That's really interesting, because for locals, the wine and tourism dichotomy, if you like, poses a dilemma. Labour in backbreaking fashion in the vineyards, or cash in by building a hotel. Now, laws do exist to protect cultivated land, but, as one wine grower lamented to us, this is Greece, so the law doesn't mean much, unfortunately. And land prices go sky high in popular areas, don't they? So pricing out wine producers. We had a ballpark figure of about, what was it, 700,000?
I think it was 700,000 euros.
Euros per hectare. Now,
yeah.
But it's not per hectare, because often land, that's a lot of land, and actually doesn't get sold in. But the
2.4
equivalent
acres.
but developers will pay those prices.
So Santorini's wine is facing an existential threat. But things have never been easy here. And this is, after all, the place where we get the word drama from. And whisper this, but from what we saw and heard while we were there, it could be that the Santorini wine empire, if we can call it that, is ready to strike back.
Nice.
Quite how it might manage this we'll come on to. But in the meantime, this is a fascinating time to be diving into Santorini and its wines.
Yeah, and on that note, we should bring in a voice from the island. So coming up, we're going to be hearing from 3 wine producers in this episode to help us tell the intriguing story of Santorini and its wines. But I promise it won't all be in Greek. To recap so far, Santorini is a stunning island in the southern Aegean with a long history of trade, wine, and terrifying tectonics. But its vineyard is now under threat from the likes of climate change and tourism. The big question is what happens next.
And to answer this question, we need to get under the skin of the island and its people. First up, to tell us a bit about how the island's wine was modernised in the 1980s from fairly rustic fare to the kind of wines we see today, we spoke to Stelios, whose influential winemaker Father Yannis was instrumental in this process.
It was back in 85 when my father came in Santorini. And he flying over the island, all of a sudden, you expect the very rocky Aegean islands, and all of a sudden, if you come sometime in April or in May in Santorini, it's even in the summer, it's all green, and it's green because of the vines. So this really intrigued him. He said, "Okay, well, I gotta do something here." At that time, my father did a partnership with the local co-op. Then my family built a winery at that time. Back in the first, so we did the harvest at the local co-op. I think 86, 87, 88. Then 89, we built our own winery. Santorini at that time was producing a lot of wine, a lot of grapes. However, most of the grapes would be put into trucks and sent to Athens, where they would be vinified there, blended with the local Savatiano grape, And at that time, the harvest would always take place in September. So it was really the alcohol level and the high acidity that helped the local Athenian wine to improve. I still remember the big trucks with the grapes, not in crates, mind you. The grapes that's thrown in the truck. So get the ship. 24 hours later, fermentation had already started, of course, in the back of the truck. So sent to Athens and made into wine there. Now, of course, this was not viable. This is not what we wanted to do, right? So my father said, okay, guys, we have to do something different. We have to harvest early August when the sugar level is like 12 degrees alcohol, 12.5 degrees alcohol. The acidity is still high and crisp and really bone dry. The minerality comes out great. So we'll harvest earlier. So, of course, nobody believed him. Then, he said, okay, what's the price of the grape? 30 drachma. Okay, I'll pay you 75 drachma. So all of a sudden, it all started to make some sense to the local growers. So this is how it all started. It was very difficult at the beginning because nobody believed us. We were outsiders really in Santorini, so nobody believed us. However, little by little, we became locals.
So I guess this was part of a wider process in Greece around this time, the 80s and 90s, when winemakers who had travelled or studied abroad came back and saw huge potential in some places and indigenous varieties which had loads of history, but no one was really doing much about it. And this coincided with Greece joining the EU, so development funds becoming available too.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, just think about it. We've seen that process kind of revitalized lately as well, in that, after the 2008 financial crisis, Greece was a basket case, wasn't it? It was, it came close to being ejected from the euro. It had 30% unemployment. Businesses were crashing all over the shop. But now, 15 years on, it's really stable. In fact, it's growing quite fast. I was reading The Economist and they say last year Greece grew almost twice as fast as the Eurozone average, and it's projected well ahead this year too. So, it's doing really well. It's a success story. Yeah. And, apparently Athens, and Stelios are saying Athens is one of the most vibrant European capitals right now. Everyone wants to sort of come, and what that all means essentially is a stronger economy with the dead wood kind of culled. And from a wine point of view, a thirstier and more interested domestic market with more opportunities to sell good wine rather than basic bulk stuff, which is, is what's historically been the norm there. So
yes, so we've got a country with ancient winemaking history, but which fell on hard times.
Yeah, the 20th century was pretty hard on Greece.
Yeah. But then it was revived from the 1980s onwards. So in some ways it's ancient, but in other ways it's actually quite young.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a bit of a weird paradox, isn't it? But I guess it's a helpful one to bear in mind. And this very theme was something that we touched on when we spoke to renowned Santorini winemaker and academic Yannis Paraskevopoulos. He was part of the team that helped develop the island's wines in the late 1980s, trying to, realise the potential of the wines by transforming them from what he described as undrinkable to something unique.
Good is one thing, but different, it's another thing. And being unique, it's also something extremely important. And what a real story, not a made-up fake story, is there to say to the world. You cannot easily sit in a taverna, enjoy a fresh fish, and have a glass of wine from vines that are 500 years old. And that's, on its own, it's a wow thing. But then the wow factor, if it doesn't come with the quality of what you're drinking, it's meaningless. Wow, you know what? Here we are in the south of Greece, in a very warm area, and we have a white grape that gives wines that have a pH lower than Rheiniger Riesling. On its own, this is mind-blowing. It was like discovering Atlantis. Everything became so new because for the first time we started applying the well-known techniques that we were taught in France, but not to make copies of French wines. We were applying the techniques just to bring forward what this berry had to bring forward. And it was all new for us, for everybody. It was new for Santorinians.
So he's mentioned vines that are 500 years old there. That's quite a claim. And that would make these vines, I mean, some of the oldest in the world.
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, no wonder he's talking about discovering Atlantis. And Santorini has been described as a viticultural Jurassic Park.
Yeah. So this is a really fascinating aspect of wine in Santorini. He did actually say he speculated that this is the oldest vineyard on the planet. More studies are needed and all that. But, why the oldest vineyard? Well, it's all to do with the soil and the way they grow and propagate their vines, because their soil is utterly volcanic with, 0% clay. This means that phylloxera, the vine louse, can't survive in those soils or on the island, which in turn means they can plant and more importantly, replant or regrow vines on their own roots, unlike most of the rest of the wine world. So they virtually never have to be uprooted to be replaced. So here, after 30, 50, 80, 100 years, they just lop off the bit of the vine above ground, they call it decapitation, and start growing a new one. And this can happen repeatedly 8, 9, 10 times in the course of a vine's lifetime. So if you do the maths, that's an old vine, it's an old root system, an old plant, hence the 500 years claim.
It is quite a thought, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think other people said they did layering, didn't they, to reproduce the vines, which is essentially just planting one of the canes, and as you do that, it just puts down its own new roots. But a lot of the vines here do seem very old. And what's also obvious is the fact the vineyards don't look like most other vineyards. The plants huddle close to the ground and they're weaved into these baskets. Even Yanis described it as odd looking, and he joked that Greeks come to the island and say, great sunsets, but I didn't see any vines, because they just don't recognise them. They don't look like vines.
Exactly. So we asked Yanis to paint a picture for us of this unique, odd vineyard with the vine branches trained in this circular basket shape just above the ground. And this is what he said.
What the Santorinians have discovered through practice, through all those centuries, is a quite unique system for conducting viticulture. You see, if we had a normal trailer system, like the rest of the world, we would lose every year grapes, either to the sun, they would be burned totally by a very torrid, striking sun, or, even worse, they would be lost to the wind. It gets really gusty. So yes, they had to find a way to actually sustain viticulture, not lose their grapes, and protect their plants and grapes from both sunshine and winds. And this very specific basket-shaped canopy management, if you may, gave the solution. So every year there's a new rim of wood that it's been woven around, and this basket grows and grows and grows. And when you see those, we call them culura, when you see those guys, you can actually measure the rims, the rings of wood, and have a very precise image of their actual age, of what you see, not the root system, obviously. So think of one that it is, let's say, 80 years old, which is very common. I won't go to the extreme of 120. It's like a spring. If you stretch this spring, the wood, and all this wood is wood, but all the elements coming from the soil have to coil around before reaching the berries, would be more than 100 meters in length. So it is mind-blowing. It's very long to create. It's very long to prune. It takes you 4 times longer to prune this difficult system than a Guillot or a Cordon Vaillant. And then obviously it's a know-how that we are losing slowly, because the young Santorinians are not eager to go and work in the fields. The elder ones are either stop or are not with us anymore. And the economic immigrants that are here for doing, fortunately for us, work in the fields, they don't have the skill. So it's something that it's very difficult, it's very expensive, and it's something that we need to find a way to preserve.
And how will you do that? What do you think?
Thank you for that question. I don't have the answer. To be honest, we are in front of a huge crisis. It's a vineyard. And winemakers around the world, I'm sure you have noticed, we are very optimistic by nature. I mean, you're not planting a vine that will yield grapes, that you'll have a wine after 10 years without being optimistic. You do find other ways of spending your money. So by nature, we're optimistic. But in this one case, I'm not. We have a very odd condition where the local community hasn't yet linked the survival of the vineyard and the survival of their touristic boom. They think those things as competitive to each other, which they are not. They are complementary to each other. So young Santorinians, no, they won't do the vines. They won't go and work in the fields. And by having something that it's so demanding, manpower-wise, I don't have a solution. I really don't.
So this is an interesting point. I mean, you have this amazing ancient vine training system that's been developed over centuries. Actually, we'll put some photos, won't we, of this on our show notes, because it's not really easy to visualize if you haven't already seen a picture. But it's hard manual labour to make it work. Konstantinos Lazarakis describes grape growing on Santorini as a labour of love. And because tourism offers easier jobs, that's quite a challenge facing wine producers.
Yeah, it's something we discussed all over the island, isn't it? Some producers are more bullish than others, especially those who can bring in teams from the mainland. One of the key issues if you do that, of course, is accommodation, which is hard to find at affordable rates on the island, as we know. One producer said they were considering building a hotel to house vineyard and hospitality workers, which is a bit ironic, all things considered. But it's obviously at the forefront of producers' minds how to work, how to maintain and keep these vineyards, and these are really important things to work out.
Yeah, for the long-term future of the vineyard, absolutely. And one other thing that they're doing is applying to UNESCO to make the traditional Santorini vineyard and winemaking a protected cultural monument or World Heritage Site, I guess. And this is to help preserve this unique wine history in another way. One other thing they're doing is pushing prices for the wines up, so it becomes a more sustainable activity commercially for growers.
We'll be discussing this a bit more in the next episode.
Yeah. But anyway, what we've got here is Yanis's take on explaining why higher prices are necessary.
And it's not because we want to extract more money from you guys, no. But if we don't, this vineyard will perish. And it will be a great loss. A great loss not for historic reasons, not because of the oldest vineyard of the planet. I speculate the oldest vineyard of the planet, but one has to prove me wrong, will perish. But those great wines will disappear. But to do that, we have to keep growers into the vineyards. And to do that, we have to give them incentive. And there's only one incentive.
So at the moment, it seems like grape prices are about €5 per kilo for PDO Santorini quality, and that's the top appellation level, which is high, isn't it? One grower put it in context as saying that they're like champagne prices, but it's still not enough to be commercially sustainable, and that's partly because yields are so painfully low on Santorini. You can only plant a certain amount of vines on the land because the soil is so poor and water is so scarce. So the average vine density is about 2,500 vines per hectare, when, I don't know, for example, Bordeaux can be up to 10,000, can't they, just for context. And the conditions mean yields of around 15 to 25 hectolitres per hectare, which is nothing. And even that's an average. It can be less than 10 hectolitres per hectare in some vintages.
And that's tiny. To put that in context, yields can be 10 times higher in the rest of Greece. So the issue is how to make this work. And the answer beyond UNESCO and all that is, as Yanis says, to position these wines at a level where the production becomes sustainable. But in order to do that, you need to be working properly. People need to be able to believe in what you're doing to support it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some interesting plans afoot on Santorini in that sense. For example, making the entire island's wine production organic. And we spoke to Matthew, or Mattheos, whose family are long-term growers and wine producers on the island. His translator was Iota, and this is what they had to say.
Ο Παπελώνας χρειάζεται και λίγο τύχη και λίγο τη βοήθεια του Θεού, γιατί η Θώμας έχει ξεχάσει λίγο. ουσιαστικά στην πραγματικότητα αυτό που πρέπει να πετύχουμε στον αμπελώνα είναι η ισορροπία.
To be successful in the vineyards, you also need a bit of luck. You know, sometimes you need the help of God. And there are times in Santorini that we feel like we are a little bit forgotten by God. Right now, our, let's say, priority and all our effort is mostly in the vineyards. This is a very important part for us to bring better and better and better quality of fruit in the winery to achieve even better results in the wines. And also we are doing altogether some efforts to, let's say, not really certify, but anyway, to make the whole island an organically grown island. As for a zone, it's going to be probably the first zone in the world that's going to be, you know, characterized as organic just because it's Santorini.
Is that feasible? Is that happening? Is that...
We are fighting for two things on the island. The first one is to preserve the vineyards of Santorini as a monument of the UNESCO. And the other is to be characterized as a 100% organically farmed zone. It's going to take a while. Both are mostly our dream, our vision, because, you know, it's not just a case of one winery or of some wineries. You need more people to be active on that. We have taken some significant steps, but it has, you know, it's going to be a long way to do it, but it's worth it. It's difficult, but we like it, especially as for the organic farming, that there are many wineries, but also many farmers involved. But we're optimistic, and we will continue taking these brave steps towards these directions.
Brave steps indeed, but it would be cool to have an entire PDO certified organic, wouldn't it?
It would.
I mean, they certainly could do it as long as they can all work together.
Yeah,
you know, I remember Stelios saying the magic of Santorini is that it's naturally organic. You don't need to do anything. And it would be another selling point for the wines.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, I think it's time to wrap this show up. Hopefully we've managed to set the scene for this stunning, historic volcanic island and its unique wine culture and heritage, which is to be celebrated, but which is also under threat from climate change and tourism. In the next episode, we'll explore the grapes and wine and look to the future, both in terms of challenges, but also reasons to be hopeful.
Don't forget the food too. We will not be neglecting that. It's such an important part of the picture, not to mention delicious. We also need to test your assertions that Santorini Assyrtiko is indeed the ultimate food wine and that this is indeed the ultimate wine destination. People might want to suggest alternatives in the interim. You know, what would your ultimate wine destination or ultimate food wine be?
A very good question to ask. I'd be fascinated to hear your views. So do send them in. It would make for a great debate, wouldn't it? Anyway, in the meantime, our thanks to Wines of Santorini and the PDO Santorini producers. And of course, thanks to you for listening. Until next time, cheers.